that back on operating. The first item, after a couple of comments on our agenda this afternoon, is to talk generally about the next steps, and then if we can, pick our way through questions on the geotech report, the survey, talk about a little bit about the cost estimating, independent cost estimating process. Jesse, do you want to start off our discussion about next steps? Because I know you had brought some stuff to the meeting that we didn't achieve quorum at that might be a good starting point.
Okay. Well, I handed out my agendas and goals for the next few meetings. I think it would be helpful to talk about the timeline for feasibility study for the next month, basically to the end, my understanding. And then I also have brought a presentation to dive into a few of these topics. We can address survey results, talk a little bit about endangered species, and discuss utility costs and project budget, if you'd like to do that. So maybe I should just jump into that part?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have in front of you the handout as well as it's up on the screen. We're going to start by talking about the results of the survey. I've added to our site plan here our two wetland areas. You can't see the point. They're in green. They're
I'm pretty sure it's a USB for the.
It's coming off of here.
For the computer itself. Yeah.
Just describe
Jesse,
what
could
you're...
you stand for me? You could hold the...
I can hold the paper. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's try that. So you can see there's three levels. There's a green outline area, which is the wetland itself. That's where the wetland flags up. And then there are two setback lines. The first is 50 feet away, and the second is 100 feet away. And of course, this is only a part of the overall site. So there's a lot more wetland towards the river, as you would expect. But these are the two areas that were unexpected, in that they are occurring in areas which are mowed right now. It's occurring in the middle of the field. So the question
It is a very wet part of the field, so that part doesn't surprise me.
It is a wet field in general. But we questioned them to make sure that the surveyor had them correct. It looked like the one at the south side was following the edge of the track, was actually on the running track, which seemed hard to understand. But yeah, it's just off of the track. So it reminds us that wetlands are, we think of the flora and fauna, we think of a wetland, but it's also the soils. And so these are places where they're finding that we have soils that would support wetlands, even though the current maintenance keeps them from happening. And so that's the way I think of it. These are always harder to understand when we come across these. So we thought about it as to how would this impact our options. Go ahead.
Sorry, just for purposes of clarity, I know you pointed at it, but what's the, between the two baseball diamonds, there's a little squiggly line that goes up and down horizontally from, I guess it's actually north to south. What is that?
I think if I'm seeing the same thing, Eric, it's kind of bordered between light green area and the vaguely gray area, at least on the screen we're looking at.
Yeah, and it's right above the play areas.
Yeah, just past the
And
edge of the
it's not a straight line, it's supposed to be
This line here.
Oh, right. That is the edge of the flood zone. So that's a town zoning area. which is different from the zoning area that the building is in, which I believe is a residential type zone. So, right, development within that squiggly area zone towards the river is already restricted by the town because it's understood to be floodplain.
So that's the, at least existing floodplain, and we all know the big conversation about that here or something.
Well, take care, because floodplain is a specific technical term talking about a 100-year storm and the likelihood of having a flood, whereas a flood zone is a zoning requirement that the town has set. So they don't coincide.
Okay, and then, okay, I get that. So then the other question is, I'm just trying to understand the map that you're pointing to. And then the line that loops down and back up, that was something that our survey did, and they came back saying it was, well, you're shaking your head. That means I completely misunderstand your presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let me help clarify. The line that swoops down is something we talked about a long time ago, but that's the 100-year flood line as it's currently recorded on the flood map. So that's the floodplain as currently mapped. And at the same time, the town is looking at new maps which would revise that line to being backed by the river.
And you also said that we did some kind of a survey that then identified land that's wet, that's identified as being wetland, whether or not, however it's mowed, maintained.
Right. In addition
So which one is that?
In addition to floodplains, I stood up and tried to point out the wetland areas. These are areas which have flora, fauna, or soils that qualify to be considered wetlands and fall under the...
Right, and I think Maria just pointed out to me, but which ones are those then?
They're in green. They're bounded by a black line, and I just stood up to try to point those to.
So are they right below the baseball diamond or softball diamond on the upper right-hand side?
That's one of them. And then on the left-hand side, up above the garden, you can see them, and right along the property line.
Okay, so above, on the upper left, also above the other softball diamond or something?
Yes.
Okay. And the wetland areas are limited to the areas that are circled in a hard black line? In those
Correct.
areas?
Yeah, they're small slivers of wetland that show up on this picture of the site, because this is just a partial site plan.
Okay.
I was also showing them with setbacks, and so those are the dashed lines that run around them at 50 feet and at 100 feet.
Thank you.
Sure.
And what the 100-foot setback, or 100 feet setback, and the 50-foot setback, how do those come into play? Are there any specific?
Glad you asked. That's the next page. So this I took straight from our narrative, and it shows you that the building setback limit at a residential lot, which is the type of zoning that the school building falls under, is 50 feet. Unless you have a vernal pool, where it would be 100 feet. And so this is going to get into the endangered species question. But that's why we're reflecting both setbacks at this time, because we haven't looked at the wetlands close enough to understand if there's a vernal pool in the middle of the fields, although it seems highly unlikely, but you may find something. Wetlands, as I mentioned, are identifying certain types of soil. The soil may support an endangered species, or it could support a vernal pool. These vernal pools then have larger setbacks. And so we've tried to be conservative and reflect the 100-foot setback around all of the wetland areas, so you can see how much space that would take up. But it's somewhat unlikely that animals have created vernal pools in the middle of your baseball fields, but it could be possible. So this would be the next step you would do, is you would hire an environmentalist to go out and look at certain times a year. You can go look for endangered species, and that hasn't been done yet.
And what about the riverfront area, the 200-foot riverfront area? Does that come in from Fort River and the brook that's on there? And are those?
It does show up on the survey. which I'm only showing you an excerpt here. I brought the survey with me, but it's 9 sheets, so it's kind of hard for you to orient to it. But you don't see, so the crop on my site plan is not within 200 feet of the river. So all that good stuff, all the wetlands by the river, the 200-foot setback, is all off the page right now. Yes.
Just a second
You
question.
have to hold it down.
Okay. Is there another wetland just on the property line to the left by the paved areas? Just to the left of the garden, is there another wetland there? Because I see that the 50 feet, the 100 feet line stretches all the way to the paved area, to the play area on the left of the building, to the north. Is there another wetland there? Because the line is a little bit narrower than the other one, just making sure. Oh. So, is this a wetland? Because I see the line stretching.
Yeah, that area that you're asking about is a wetland. So there are 2 on the left side of the garden. There's a very skinny one which runs up above the softball field, and then there's a wider one which runs parallel to the property line. Okay, I'd like to move forward and we can always come back. So I looked at our design options and looked for areas where our buildings overlap the wetland setback lines, because that would be relevant to our feasibility study and development. Option C, as you can see, encroaches upon that wetland area adjacent to the property line that Irene just asked me about. It encroaches on the setbacks, not actually into the wetland itself. And then, looks like I ran right over option A, sorry about that. Option A shows the approach driveways interrupting that sliver of wetland at the south side of the site. This doesn't seem to us to be a developmental problem because regulations allow us to relocate up to 5,000 square feet of wetlands. And that area of wetlands that we're impacting in option A is 3,000 square feet. So we should be able to relocate it, I would imagine, over by the river. And we would have to then create twice as much as we relocated. So if we relocated this full 3,000 square foot piece of wetland, we'd have to create 6,000 square feet of wetlands at another location on the site, which seems to us to be a pretty doable solution.
Would that also be able to go into an option C, right?
In the same, C, would be the same approach. We would reduce the area of that wetland that we're encroaching into the setbacks of to move the building out of the setbacks, and we create more wetland elsewhere on the site.
And because so much of the rest of the remaining site is already wetland, do we actually for sure have that square footage available?
Yeah, I think we do. And I guess you just have to trust me right now. I've looked at the whole survey in some spaces.
I'm assuming wetland isn't eligible for redevelopment as additional wetland.
No, you're right. You can't affect the other wetland on the site, but it's a large site in their space. Okay. Change gears completely here. You can come with me. We had shown you an initial report on utility cost per year and carbon emissions. And we worked on that further. You had made a good remark about is a net zero building really $0 per year in terms of utility costs. You had asked if we could please itemize some of those costs that the net zero building would face in terms of utilities, because we know in terms of usage, it's basically zero, but there are fees and other aspects that come into play, demand charges. So we did that, and so we're able to report now for an option A building using a chilled beam mechanical system with an air source heat pump. That the utility cost per year would be $40,000 to $50,000 after the renewable energy credits are sold. And I can explain that a little more in the following slide. We've also itemized the carbon emissions. I don't think we talked about this last time very much, which are broken into 3 different scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 are those carbon emissions directly released by the building system. So if you had a fossil fuel burning building, you would see scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is emitted in the production of the electricity used. This reflects the fact that the electrical grid is not fully carbon-free, that there's some gas, perhaps coal in our grid right now. And so if we use the electricity from the grid, we're emitting carbon just over at the plant. And scope 3 addresses embodied energy in the building materials. So this captures carbon that's used to build a building, whether it's to create the steel or to ship materials to buildings. This is by far the hardest to estimate, and I really should put some qualifications on this. We achieved this number, it's a little cut off, but it's 1.7 million by working with our sustainability consultant who has done life cycle cost analyses on school new construction in the past. And based on their experience with that, they have a sense of the amount of scope 3 carbon that's required for new school construction. And we just multiplied that by the square footage of the project to get to this number. So I'm going to move through the 3 and then ask the questions. We also looked at option C, and we looked at the same.
What was the 1.7 million kilograms per year? So that we divided over the 50-year life of the
It
building?
would just be kilograms.
Total.
Yeah, so the new building is a pile of kilograms of carbon. And you can start to think about it as you look at option C, which has some scope 2 emissions. So it's using, so its electricity that it's using requires 130,000 kilograms per year to be emitted. You can start to look at how many years would it take for the carbon emissions of option C to overtake that in the building. Does that make sense to anyone? So while option A uses more carbon on day 1, over 7 years, option C would pass it, and it would have more carbon usage after the 7th year. So it depends on what your duration of carbon usage is that you're looking at this. Sir?
I think Eric said after the 6th year.
6th year, thank you. Yeah. You're right. Also, the utility costs we looked at for option C, we came out with $120,000 to $150,000 per year. And the scope 1 emissions are 0 because, again, this is an all-electric building. And then for the last option we studied, we looked at option E, which is our fossil fuel burning renovation, primarily with a small amount of new construction. And this is a variable air volume system, and we have the existing gas boilers. And the utility cost per year is $110,000 to $120,000. And we have scope 1 emissions now at $110,000 per year, scope 2 at $150,000 per year. And then the effort to renovate and build that new construction is 850,000 kilograms of scope 3 emissions.
So Jesse, just to be clear, the embodied energy is in the new building materials being used to do the project rather than the embodied energy of the building that's left in place, right?
That's correct. So the reason a renovation project has a lower scope 3 is because all those materials that are left in place are not counted. It's sort of the sustainable aspect of doing the renovation project. Is you're reusing the superstructure, the steel, and the brick.
Right. So for all of the options, we've got the HVAC maintenance costs listed at high. And that's even with E being a different system. It's being system 6 as opposed to 4 and 5 for the other two options. So I'm wondering why those are all the same for maintenance costs, and what does high mean?
That's a good point. The intent was to have option E reflect a low HVAC maintenance cost. But it's an oversimplification on one hand. It may be as far as we can go in the study, depending on how much feedback we can get from the facilities team in town. So we're going to see about that. But we wanted to reflect in some way that there was more complexity in the chilled beam and air source heat pump that would probably result in a maintenance cost to the staff that need to operate that system. Whereas in option E, we understood that the town has the capability and is familiar with the VAV system, and so you wouldn't see that kind of increase in staffing knowledge, and you wouldn't be dealing with that kind of a complex HVAC system. So it's a lead-in to doing a full-fledged operational cost analysis, but it stops short of actually putting dollars to the amount of staff and trying to estimate what those costs would be.
So then I guess I'm still confused about why they all say high.
No, option E is wrong. It should say
Okay,
wrong.
so literally it's a typo.
It's a typo.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Sorry about that.
Tracy, I have a question about the utility cost per year. Option E seems to be lower utility cost than option C.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Option C, even though it has a larger new construction, a bigger part of option C is net zero, it's also an all-electric building. And so the heating cost in the winter with gas is cheaper. And so that's what's driving up option C to be more expensive.
Even though that it's a UI 30 and a 50.
Even though it's a UI 30, that's correct. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I can show you, I developed this breakdown of option A, and I may just completely read you here, and I apologize for that before. But I wanted to show you kind of what happens, or at least our understanding of your electric bill in a net zero all-electric building. So the slide starts at the top. It repeats the utility cost per year that we're reporting. It reminds you the GSF that it's 100% net zero and it's a UI 30. And then it gets into usage. And so you can see that the electrical usage is your 30 UI times the square footage times the factor, but it ends up being zero $0 of electrical usage because you're net zero 100%. So that, I think, makes sense to everyone. But there are charges that you still get hit with from the utility just being tied to the grid. One would be your monthly charge, which is $300 in our study, or $3,600 per year, which is small. But there's also the other charges, which are based on your usage and which wouldn't go away, is our understanding. So we have 3.5 cents per kilowatt, which would be pretty small, but an electric building's kilowatt is really high, 747,000 kilowatts. So you see $26,000 of cost just in this other charges category, which is based on usage. The other thing that is difficult to work out in these kinds of projections is the demand cost, because they look at each month and they look at your highest 30 minutes of usage per month. So we had to develop an energy model, a simple energy model, to predict what this would be. And then my calculation is a little bit oversimplified that I reported there, but we found then the average over all 12 months was 315 kilowatts. So then I'm multiplying it by 12, and then at $18 a kilowatt, which is what we understand the rate to be for a building this size, we get $68,000 there just in demand costs. So you'd have a total bill of $94,000 for your net zero brand new building if it wasn't for the RECs. So RECs are renewable energy credits, and you're allowed to sell them through a bidding process, which the rate then changes. We don't exactly know the rate, but we base the rate on where we see RECs selling at this point. And the number of RECs you get is the number of kilowatts of your building, that same 747,000 divided by 1,000. So if 747 RECs at $70 gives you a credit of $52,000 per year for selling your RECs, which I understand lasts for 15 years. So that results in $42,000, which after all of this are trying to predict your rates, we felt like we should report 40 to 50,000 and not report $42,000. It seemed too precise.
There's a little too much exactitude there.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit further about the RECs, and is that, I mean, you get that 52,000 every year, or that's a one-time sale?
I believe you get it every year for 15 years as long as the program is in place.
And after the, I mean, I know this is a hypothetical, like it's a really major hypothetical, but after the 15 years, conceptually, does the bill go back up to something approximately 94,000?
Yeah, I believe so, unless these programs are extended, because it's a government-based incentive right now. So I think the concept is to cover sort of the effective life of solar panels.
Could you talk about, so I don't know if it comes into the demand cost or not, but one of the things that, thinking about a net zero building and a school building in particular, is that we're going to be having our peak production in the summer when we have the least amount of usage.
Right.
And that mismatch seems particularly onerous in a school building when you're looking at a net zero goal, and not necessarily a school being the best candidate for a net zero building in that regard. But how does that mismatch of peak production and usage play into this demand? Or is the solar panels not even, like, do you get to use, not asking this question for you, do you know what I'm driving at? Like, is that affected by the demand in it? Or this demand calculation, do we get to offset somehow? Or is that demand is not calculated with solar panels in the equation at all?
No, it is calculated with the panels in the equation. So if you think in January, it may be that 30 minutes where you had snow and solar panels in the morning and you had to heat the building. And so that might have been your highest for that month. Or in the summer, in some ways the sun is working for you in the summer, and then it's offsetting your demand. However, if you're cooling the building before the sun rises, if it's a cloudy day or something, but still hot and humid, you may hit that peak for that month. So I think hypothetically we can talk about it, but if we can start to dive in beyond that, cooling loads are also substantial. So if we're using the building half as frequent as we've been assuming, if we're using half of the building in the summer, is what I meant to say, I suppose it puts the focus more on the winter use. But I don't know. We'd have to, I guess, dig into that further to know more about how to answer your question.
This is probably beyond what you guys have looked at, but if we had a battery system that would bring down our peak usage, is that a way that others are strategizing to bring down this demand cost?
Yeah, we have seen, I haven't done batteries, but we've used ice storage. And there are some techniques that target lowering demand. So yeah, there are strategies we would employ. As you remember, this air source heat pump has an electric boiler associated with it as well. So we have to be strategic there that we're trying to offset the demand of the electric boilers.
And this, the peak demand again is winter or summer school use?
Well, it's the peak demand each month, the top
that's
30 minutes each month. So it makes it hard to think about, because normally in the past, we've always thought about peak demand year-round. And then you end up in the summer usually, which we kind of already talked about a little bit in the previous meeting. But here we're talking about the peak demand each month. So it's 12 different peaks. So we use the energy model to try to predict that as best we could.
I'm going to play a little bit of a timekeeper role. I don't want to cut things off, but I also want to make sure we get to the kind of schedule and then
Yeah.
break that down.
Yeah.
Did you have more slides?
That's the last.
Okay. Move on and ask you to present the kind of agendas and goals for the next few weeks.
Sure.
Have a discussion about how we move forward and make sure we cover everything we need to cover.
Okay. Well, I originally had this for the last meeting, which didn't happen. But we were going to discuss the results of the community outreach meeting on February 13th. I guess we could also talk about this morning. Discussing, so maybe I should speak a little more general. Here are agendas for each of the next 2 meetings and the agenda for today. Basically, the timeline as I see it is we are updating the pricing narrative to give to your independent cost estimator